Hello dear class 11 students, welcome back to this online tutoring alternative English class with me, your tutor Esther Zolbio. I'm sure you all were excitedly waiting for this video lesson because I think that you are passionate about learning something new every day. The lesson that we'll be doing today is from the first section, After Bhopal by Harshmender. Now, first of all, about the author Harshmender. Born on 17th of April 1955, is an Indian author, columnist, researcher, teacher, and social activist who works with survivors of the mass violence and hunger, as well as homeless people and street children. He is the director of the Center for Equity Studies, a research organization based in New Delhi. He also served as Special Commissioner to the Supreme Court of India in the Right to Food campaign and was a member of the National Advisory Council of the Government of India. He has occasionally come under media attention for his liberal views. Bhopal disaster, also known as Bhopal gas tragedy, was a gas leak incident that took place on the night of 2nd December in 1984 at the Union Carbide India Limited UCIL pesticide plant in Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh, India. It is considered among the world's worst industrial disasters, because over 500,000 people were exposed to methyl isocyanate, MIC gas. Estimates vary on the death toll. The official immediate death toll was 2,259. A government affidavit in 2006 stated that the leak caused 558,125 injuries, including 38,478 temporary partial injuries and approximately 3,900 severely and permanently disabling injuries. Others estimate that 8,000 died within 2 weeks, and another 8,000 or more have since died from gas-related diseases. The lesson that we are doing today is the story of Sunil, an 11-year-old boy whose life was deeply affected by the Bhopal gas tragedy. His story gives us an insight of what actually happens to people who faces this kind of disasters in the deepest and darkest way. So without wasting any more time, let's dive into the lesson and check out what actually really happened. On a December night, when Sunil and his family were sleeping, they were roused by shouting and knockings at the door. When they got up, they found themselves gasping for breath, their eyes burning as if they were on fire, coughing and screaming. They ran out of their homes and were swept away by a surging human torrent. Sunil, then 11 years old, tightly held the hand of his younger sister, whose name was Mamata, and as they ran desperately, lost in the dense clouds of gas, he got separated from the rest of his family. Suddenly, even his sister Mamata's hand was violently separated out of his. Screaming people rushing from all sides, from all directions, some fell and were crushed, others tore off their clothes, yet others were vomiting uncontrollably. Sunil ran, gasping for his life, his eyes afire, until he could make out a van of a family who were trying to escape. He pushed his way inside and escaped with them. Sunil's relatives narrated the fatal incident that happened to his family. He was told that his mother had died holding her 8-month-old infant son, Sanjay, who miraculously survived. Their father had returned to their hut the next morning. On the night of the gas leak, he had locked the hut before they ran. So when he opened the door on his return the next morning, he found the dead body of one of his sons, Santosh, who had accidentally been left behind in the panic. Shortly after, the father died, perhaps of the gas or maybe of a broken heart. So of his 7 brothers and sisters, only the baby Sanjay and his younger sister Mamata were saved. Now Sunil suddenly found himself almost completely alone in the world because he is now responsible for looking after his 8-month-old brother and his younger sister Mamata. The relatives of Sunil persuaded him to move to Lucknow with his brother and sister. But within 6 months, young Sunil returned back to Bhopal because he didn't like the fact that his relatives used his younger sister Mamata as a servant in their home. So Sunil decided to bring up his younger brother Sanjay and sister without the help of his relatives. In the early years, the survivors lived on relief. The efforts of the government to rebuild their livelihoods ended as sad and expensive failures. The Madhya Pradesh government spent rupees 700 million for this purpose, which succeeded in creating long-term livelihoods for little more than 80 women. Sunil recalled with gratitude a young man whose name was Muhammad Ali, who helped him secure his compensation by taking him to various government offices, because Sunil was very young that time. Initially, for each dead person, rupees 10,000 was given to the closest kin. 7 of them died in Sunil's family, so he received a total amount of rupees 70,000. And of this, rupees 10,000 went to his sister's husband in Lucknow. The rest of the family was placed in the rest of the money was placed in fixed bank deposit. Sunil received rupees 580 per month as interest from the bank. So with this, he brought up his family. The boy decided not to go back to school and instead devote himself entirely to his brother and sister, whom he got admitted to an SOS village. Now, what is an SOS village? SOS Village is an independent, non-governmental social development organization that provides care and support for children and disadvantaged families. So, meanwhile, unknown to Sunil and other residents of JP Nagar, as they struggled for livelihood and ways to stem their failing health, a curious legal battle was being fought on their behalf in the court of the India and the US. The Indian government, through the Bhopal Gas Leak Disaster Act of March 1985, arrogated to itself exclusive powers to represent the victims in the civil litigation against the Union Carbide. On behalf of the victims, the Indian government filed a suit for compensation of more than $3 billion in the Federal Court of the Southern District of New York. In the search for a star witness in New York courts, government officials settled for Sunil because he was a child who has lost much of his family in the tragedy. So he was flown to the US with the Indian government team. In the court, Sunil recounted his story in fluent Hindi, and his testimony was translated for the judge. He learned later that the case was returned in May 1986 to the Indian courts on grounds of firm non-convenience, under the condition that during the proceedings of the Bhopal District Court, Union Carbide was directed to pay an interim relief of Rs 3,500 million so that the delay in the adjudication of the case would not adversely affect the claimants. However, Union Carbide refused to pay this sum, and its appeal against this decision reached the Indian Supreme Court on February 14, 1989. In a sudden departure from the matter of interim relief, the Supreme Court passed an order approving the settlement that had been reached between the Government of India and the Union Carbide, without the knowledge of the claimants of Bhopal, according to the terms of the settlement, in exchange for payments of $470 million. The corporation was to be absolved of all liabilities. Criminal cases against it and its officials were to be dropped, and the Indian government was to defend the corporation in the event of future suits. The settlement summed nearly 1/7 of the damages initially claimed by the government, was not only far below international standards, but was even lower than the modest standards set by the Indian Railways for railway accidents. The Supreme Court revised its judgment on October 3, 1991, upholding the settlement amount paid by Union Carbide, but directing the Indian government to make good any shortfall. Over time, it became increasingly difficult for Sunil to return to his empty house. It was too full of memories. His brother and sister were growing up in the SOS village. In 1991, he moved in with leading activist and his long-term friend named Satyu. A year later, in 1992, the state government built a widows' colony. Houses were allotted by lottery to widows and orphans who had survived the gas tragedy, and Sunil qualified. He then moved into this colony, where he lived until his death. In 1994, his sister turned 18, beyond the protection offered by the SOS village in Bhopal. Sunil decided to get both his sister and brother discharged from the SOS village and bring them over to live with him. Their presence filled a little bit the accumulated loneliness that had festered inside his soul all these years. But perhaps they returned too late. As time passed, Sunil became more and more withdrawn and uncommunicative. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he found himself slowly cracking up within him. He was frequently depressed and became obsessed with thoughts of suicide. He heard voices call out to him. He would not stir out of his home, would not wash himself or talk to people. There were times when he ran out of the house without clothes, feverishly roaming the streets night and day, running miles along the railway track deep into the forest. A decade prior to his passing away, Sunil has been on medication for his mental illness. He refused to consider marriage for himself. He, firm in his resolve to first ensure a good future to those who he had taken under his care almost 22 years earlier. In time, he got his sister Mamata married to an electrician and his brother educated in an English medium school. Today, he is a graduate. Before Sunil died, he was in search of a suitable bride for his brother. So students, with that we come to the end of the summary of our lesson. Let's discuss some questions related to Sunil in this lesson. At the beginning of the chapter, Sunil is very eager to go to school, but somewhere towards the middle, he decides not to go to school. Why did he have to make this choice? So at the beginning of the story, Sunil is shown as an eager schoolboy and receiving education. But later in life, situations compelled him to decide not to continue with his studies. His life went through a huge change after the Bhopal gas tragedy in 1984. He was only 11 years old when the tragedy took place, where he lost his parents and 5 siblings on that dreadful night. He found himself almost completely alone in the world after the incident, with no one to look after them. He had a challenging responsibility to shoulder of raising an infant brother and Sanjay and his younger sister Mamata. When his relatives took his younger sister for servant, he decided to take her and the infant baby brother back to the village and bring them up all by himself. So he decided not to go to school, but instead devote his time entirely to bring up his family. Now, we say that the depression of Sunil went through when he reached adulthood was a result of delayed reaction to the pain that he went through as an 11-year-old. Can we say that? At such a young age, when Sunil was barely 11 years old, he had to handle too much of situation that came along with the Bhopal gas tragedy. He had shouldered the responsibility of looking after the brother and sister as a parent and as a brother, from their basic needs to securing their future. Sunil had to struggle and sacrifice his own needs. He was a burning candle giving light to others while burning off his own self. All these years of pain, struggling, and suffering got accumulated in his soul. Years of hardening isolation. The callous approach of communal forces of which he had been a member, and the humiliating rumors spread against him by the estranged organization so compelled Sunil to withdraw into his own shell and fostered his depression. Thus, we can say that his adulthood depression was a partial result of a delayed reaction to the pain that he had through as an 11-year-old. So, dear students, the story of Sunil in this lesson portrays a small slice of how disasters affect people's lives in the deepest and darkest ways the rest of the world has no idea about. So with that, we come to the end of our lesson for today. See you again in our next video lesson. Until then, stay safe.